Guys, this is Jesse Dunlap here with the first tutorial for the official 1.0 release of the P framework. We're going to be writing a chat application today, as we've done in the previous tutorials. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get started. So the first thing you want to do with P is install it. So to do that, we're going to use the Node Package Manager. And on Unix, well, that includes Mac and Linux, you'll want to use a sudo command, or you'll want root access. Then you can just type npm install p-framework, and don't forget the -g. That will allow you to use the P framework executable anywhere. It's kind of just useful. So go ahead and install the dependencies, and hopefully it won't take too long. Okay, so we've got all the dependencies and the P framework is installed in our system now. So let's go ahead and go to our desktop. And on Linux, Mac, Windows, anything, once you've done that command, you can do p engage, and then we'll just specify a directory. So we'll make it chat-app, and it'll basically set up a new working P framework application for you. So I'll go ahead and open this in TextMate, and we can see we've got a nice directory structure all laid out, ready to go. And if we go back to the terminal window, we can type npm start, and that will start up a P framework server. Alternatively, we can do the traditional node app, and that will also start a P framework server. So once we have one started, the first thing we want to do for our chat application is generate a controller and a model. So to do that, we'll start with the controller. We're going to use the generate command. We'll say we want to generate a controller, and we will generate a chat controller. And you'll see it places it in the controllers folder, and we'll look at that in a second. The next thing we want to generate is a model. So generate model, and we want to generate a Mongo.js model. And then, so the first parameter we specify here is a singular capitalized version of what we'll be storing. So let's give this, we'll call it message. And then the second parameter is the collection for Mongo.js we want to use, and we'll just say that's messages. So it'll go ahead and generate the model there. So let's go and look at those files. So that resides in the app directory. This is where all of your application files are. So we see in controllers we have, in addition to the two default controllers, we have the chat controller. And it didn't do much for us, except it put this boilerplate code. We can implement more actions here as we need. And we'll also look at the message model we generated. Now you'll notice there's really nothing in here except for it specifies that it's an automatic model. Currently only Mongo.js models can do automatic behavior, otherwise you'll have to manually implement a CRUD, that's create, update, read, and delete architecture. But the automatic system will automatically implement those systems for you. And we can see we're specifying a collection here, and this is just our data object, which will get populated by us and the automated model system later on. Okay, so let's go ahead and just create our chat view first of all. So we'll go into Views, English, Localization, and then we'll choose the Index view. And we see we have all this kind of boilerplate HTML. We can get rid of all of that, and we will make a input bar for them to type a username and a message, and then we will make a box where all of the messages will show up. So I will just quickly set this interface up. And for those of you not familiar, P framework by default uses the Foundation CSS library, which is what these row and columns, it's like a built-in grid system, makes your app look pretty nice out of the box. And you'll see that more in just a second. So I'm going to wrap all of this in a form. And the kind of important part right now is that we're going to specify a p:\action attribute, and that will automatically link our form up with a controller action. And the form's data will be serialized into JSON and sent to the controller action as well. So the syntax for that is the controller name, a period, and then the action we want to link to. So we'll link to chat.send. And so when the form is submitted, whether it's by clicking the submit button, triggering the submit action, or pressing enter in an input, it will go, instead of redirecting to a blank page, it will go to the controller action. And I gave this input here an ID for a reason, and I'll show you that in just a second. It's basically going to let our controller access it, and in just a second you'll see how. Okay, so that does it for the send message form. Now we'll just make another row. And we'll make a div with another ID called messages. And that's where all of the chat messages that are coming in will go. Okay. So we'll go ahead and go to the chat controller again. And we don't need our index action, but we do need a this.send action. And that's going to accept some form data. So the first thing with this action that we can really do right now is we're going to use that inputs ID, and we're just going to clear it so when the user presses enter or presses send, they can't spam the button, they'll have to type a new message. And I suppose we can also check if data.message.length is 0. Just don't do anything. And so then we just use the $, which basically mimics the jQuery $. Select that div, set its value to nothing. And just a reminder, that's what we're selecting here. This kind of logic it's probably best to do that in the view, but it really doesn't make a difference. And again, those of you who haven't seen previous P tutorials, this code here is actually happening on the server side, so it's pretty interesting how you can just interact with elements, and in real time they'll just change on the user's page. And you'll see that, of course, in just a second. So in our send, we also want to broadcast this message to everyone connected. So to do that, we just access the clients array, and we'll just loop through it. The clients array is basically an array of P instances, so when we have this client variable here, we can use it just like we would use our very own P variable. So let's go ahead and say client.controller. I'm going to access the chat controller of the client, and we're going to call the receive message. Sorry, the receive action. And let's go ahead and just pass in the data that came from the form to the receive action. And we will go ahead and implement the receive action. Okay, and all the receive action is going to do is, so we're triggering the receive action and sending the message data to every client connected to the chat application. And so then, basically, they're going to use this receive action and actually render that message on their screen. So to do that, we will select the messages div, and we're going to append or no, sorry, let's prepend it. And we're going to access a snippet, which we'll create in just a second, and we'll call that snippet a message snippet. And we'll just send the message data to that view. And a snippet is just a view that doesn't actually get rendered on the page. The contents just gets put through whatever view renderer you're using and then returned. So it's easy to it makes it nice for outsourcing HTML from your controller, and of course they're localized and everything else. So a message is just going to be a div, and we'll have it say message.username. And currently this is using EJS. You can use Jade or Mustache in P as well, if you desire. So we'll say their username said ... enter a break, and then we'll go ahead and print the message. And then we'll put a horizontal rule underneath it. So there we go. That should be our basic message logic for sending messages. So let's go ahead and just restart this P framework server. And now we can open our browser and just go to 127.0.0.1, port 8888, and we'll see we have this nice interface already. Let me just double check this view here. Yeah, okay, it looks like we're good. So we can enter a username. I'll say my name is Jesse, and I can say hello world, and we see that the message pops up on the screen. So let's go ahead and open another instance of this app. We'll go to the same page, and now you see right now that we don't actually see the messages. We're going to do that with the database in just a bit, but we can, type a message, and we will see it pop up on all of our screens, and anyone connected from the point they connect will start seeing messages. Now, one thing I'm noticing is that for some reason it looks like we didn't clear this value properly. So that's usually just an issue of who knows what it could be. I probably am just missing something. It's pretty late. But anyway, again, that could be done on the client side. So that's not a big deal. We have other stuff we need to do. Okay, so we have a chat, but now let's actually store these messages to a database. So we're going to keep our current logic, but we're also, in addition to looping through, we're going to add these messages to the messages collection. So the first thing we want to do, since we created this model before, the message model, we want to go ahead and connect to a MongoDB database. So before I forget, I'm just going to start the MongoDB database, and that'll start up in the background. And we'll go ahead and configure the MongoDB database now. So the first place we look is the config/environment file. And this right here, this Mongo config, is where that is all go. You can specify host, port, username, password, and then the database. We're going to change the database to chat. And don't forget, in the production environment, you also can change it to a different one for when you do go into production mode. Okay, so that's the configuration we want to do. Now in our app controller, in the onload method, and the onload method, what it does is when the user connects to your application, you can do processing. The app controller is kind of special. It's not a normal controller really, but it has onload, it has on exit for when the user disconnects. You can do background processing and save work and whatever you need to do. And before filter gets triggered before any controller is loaded. So you can do pre-processing for any controller. Just as a side note, the before filter method can also be used in any controller to just do processing when that controller is loaded. And you can learn more about that in the documentation. Okay, so back on track. In the onload method, we want to do p.db equals p.lib. We're going to connect to the Mongo database. So we'll use the Mongo library, and we'll just call .connect, and that looks at the config and automatically connects to the configured database. And we just need to specify in a list the collections we want to use. So currently the only one is messages. And if I weren't to put that and tried to use the database, P will just in the console automatically tell you, it'll actually just give you this exact code to paste in. So that's kind of helpful. Okay, so that's all the database setup we need to do. And we can close this message model right now. So after we send the message to all the clients, we can save it to the database. So to do that, we're going to do var message model equals p.model message, and then we can do message model.data equals data, and then we'll do message model.create. And that's really all we can do. We can also accept a callback, which if we wanted to do something after we're done creating it, then we can, but we really don't need to. It can just kind of happen in the background. So now in our index controller, so this is what happens when the user connects to the app. It goes first to the app controller's onload method, and when the onload method calls the callback, it goes to the index controller, where you can see we're loading the index view. So in addition to that, we're going to go ahead and read all of the messages from the database that have been saved, and then we will populate them manually once we've loaded the index view. So to do that, we'll make another instance of the message model. And then we'll just call message model.read. And in this case, we do want to use the callback, and the results parameter that we get will be all of the messages. So results.forEach function message will loop through them, and we're just going to do what we did in the chat controller and use this code. So we'll prepend the snippet, and instead of message, or instead of data, we want to put message here. Okay, so let us go ahead and restart our app, and we'll go to the page. Okay, so we don't see any messages now, but hopefully when we send a message, okay, so we don't get any errors. But now if we start up an instance of the browser, we can see we already have a chat log from previous chats. So we can input, Bob. Bob can say, hey Jesse, how's it going? And Jesse can say, good, thanks. Okay, so all of a sudden Bob gets an earthquake at his house and his browser closes. But not to worry, Bob has earthquake insurance, so he gets back online within 30 seconds. And we still have all of this chat. So Bob can tell Jesse about the earthquake. And they can just keep chatting. So there we go. We have chat history now. So one final thing I'll show you guys is a good use for the onExit method. So when the user disconnects, we want to tell everyone else on the server that they did disconnect. Now, onExit, when the user closes their browser, the app is still running essentially. There's really nothing that you can't do aside from obviously like changing elements on that user's page because they don't have the page open. Otherwise, everything's still working, and it'll just kind of garbage collect as it goes. So when they disconnect, we'll go ahead and send a hey, I'm out of here message. So we will the best way to do that, I think, is to trigger the send method. So we will go ahead and say, I'm trying to think basically what we want to do. I think when we send a message at all, we want to save the username that we use. So like that. And that way when we exit in our app controller, we can use that username. So p.controller chat .send, and we'll specify username is p.username, so use the username we've been using, and message is I'm out of here. Okay, so let's see how that works. So we'll restart the server, get 2 people connected. Alright, so we'll have Jesse, we'll have Bob. Okay, so Bob gets another earthquake, and when he disconnects, we see Bob says, I'm out of here, disconnect. And when Jesse disconnects, we don't see it, but when we go back, we can see, for some reason, that's strange. Why didn't those get saved to the database? So for some odd reason, they didn't get saved to the database. Maybe we just terminated the connection too fast. Oh, yes. Okay, so when you actually close the browser, P, because of just like to keep things cleaned up, P automatically terminates your database connections. So if you need to do something with the database, you can just restart that for a second and make sure that you terminate it again once you're done. I've never really found that I needed to use the database afterwards. However, I'll probably be incorporating some way to, like prevent that database from disconnecting, or give it like a timeout or something that it disconnects after a certain amount of time. But anyway, so that is our demonstration. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you guys are really excited about P. I know I am, and I'm really happy to be at release 1.0. So thanks guys for watching, and have a nice evening.